Hey there, I'm Mark. Welcome to my studio. And today we're going to take a look at this thing that I just finished building. It doesn't have a name yet. Maybe by the end of the video you can watch and drop a comment down below and let me know what you think I should call this thing. First I'll explain what it is and how it works, and then maybe that'll give you some ideas. So this is a large sheet of frosted acrylic. And what I've done is I've built this frame around the outside of it with some electronics up here in this top corner so that I can plug it into power like so, and it lights up, right, and it glows. I can connect to it via Wi-Fi from my computer, or in this case from an app on my phone. I can change its color so it can be green or red or whatever color we want it to be. I can also set presets and save them to do things like animations and such like this. So what do I plan to use this for? Well, two things, or at least two ideas at first here. One is when I finish building a Gunpla kit and I'm doing a photo or video shoot of it, to have this thing standing up as a backdrop behind the kit, either on a turntable if I'm taking video or just taking still photos. And I can either have it doing an animation like this or just being a solid color and just add some interest as a backdrop behind the kit. You can see as well, it shows a bit through from whatever's sitting behind it. So I could put some different textures and patterns behind that photo shoot as well and probably get some cool effects. So that's one idea. The other idea is I can actually put this thing flat on my desktop, and if I'm filming video or streaming live builds, with my camera looking down from above onto my build surface, this can actually be my build surface. And so I can have it either showing a color, which might be a little too distracting, or just showing a nice white light so that it helps with the lighting of the video that I'm shooting. I could even potentially, if I'm streaming, have it react to stream events like follows and new subscribers and things like that. So we'll give all those things a try later on in this video and see what I can actually use this thing for. But before we get to that, I'm gonna go back in time, or send you to myself back in time, about a day or so ago when I started putting this thing together. And I'm gonna go through the whole process of everything required to build this, and wiring it all up and installing the software and everything, some of the custom enclosures and components that I designed and built to put this thing together. So that if you're building an LED project, this same thing or something like it, should give you enough background information to do all of that yourself. So I'm gonna throw it to myself about a day ago and let me tell you how this was built. Okay, so here on my desk I have all of the components that we should need to assemble this project. I guess that's not true. We don't have the very most important component of all, which I'll bring into frame real quickly here so you can see it. This is our large sheet of acrylic. It is 24 inches by 18 inches and ½ an inch thick. It's frosted on this top side. It's actually transparent on the back side. So we might get a different effect depending on which side of the finished product that we're looking at. That'll be interesting to see once we're done here. So the idea is that we're gonna put this strip of LEDs around the outside of that piece of acrylic with the LEDs pointed toward the middle, and then we're gonna be able to light them up and change their colors and do different animations and patterns and that sort of thing as well. So what we're gonna need to do all of those things is everything here on the desk. Obviously we need a strip of LEDs. For me, this is a leftover strip from a different project. So if you buy a new roll of LED, you'll probably have wires already attached to it. In my case, this has been cut, so I'm gonna have to solder new wires onto here. And we'll get started with that in just a few minutes here. But the other things we're gonna need are the controller board. This is an ESP32 controller board. It's got USB connectivity that we'll use to flash the software onto it. And it can take power over that USB, but what I've decided instead is to power this thing with an external power adapter. So we have our little barrel plug connector that will wire into the system, and then our power adapter, so we'll be able to plug the finished product right into the wall, and we won't need to hook it up to USB or anything like that. We've got, of course, different wires that we're gonna need to solder things together, and then I'm gonna use these Wago connectors as well to connect up some of the wiring so that the individual components, the control board, the power, the LEDs, can all remain separate, or at least easily removable by just unclipping these Wago clips. That way in the future, if I wanna change out just the control board or just the LEDs, I'll be able to do that fairly easily. Everything else over here is 3D printed, right? So these are parts that I've designed, and I will share a link in the description down below to my profile at printables.com where I'll share these so that if you're following along and if you have a piece of acrylic with exactly the same dimensions, you could print these out and use them. They are made very specifically to fit that sheet of acrylic. So hopefully everything will press fit into place. These will go on the corners and these long straight ones will go along the sides. And we won't have to use any glue or anything else like that to attach this thing on. Again, I want to make it so it's easy to disassemble and change out parts in the future if I need to. And so along with that idea, we've also got this electronics enclosure where all of these parts will snap fit hopefully into place here. And then once they're in place, we'll flip this over and snap fit this onto the top right corner of the whole piece. And we've got this hole here that the power will plug into, and it'll be a nice little self-contained unit that we can then connect to via Wi-Fi and control its coloring and animations and that sort of thing. All of these components that I bought here, I bought them all on Amazon, I believe, and I'll leave links in the description below to the exact things so that if you're following along and you want to build this exact project, you can do that. I would say, though, definitely shop around because, you know, things like these ESP32 boards, you can get them from different manufacturers with the same capabilities. And, you know, the ones I got were just the best price that I happened to find at the time that I went shopping, but that may not be the case when you're looking at this later on. So yeah, definitely shop around. But what you want is an ESP32 board, a strip of individually addressable LEDs, fairly dense, fairly close together on the strip as well, because we don't want to see the individual lights shining through the acrylic. We'd like to see a nice even glow instead. Other than that, yeah, everything here that we've talked about. And what we're going to do to get started with the project, I believe, is we're going to go ahead and flash the software that we need onto this controller module. So I'm going to find a USB cord, it's micro USB, get this plugged into my computer, and then we'll look at how to install the software. All right, so the control software we're going to install on our little ESP32 board here is called WLED. And actually installing it's quite simple. It's a browser-based process. We'll go through it here. First thing to do is to plug your device into a USB cable and into your computer. And on mine, there's a little red power light that shows up that shows that it's connected and getting power. So that's a good indication that things are going to work out for us. So now what we need to do is open up our browser and go to install.wled.me. I believe that, at least for a while, this installer only worked on Google Chrome and Chrome-based browsers. So if you're using something else, you might have to switch browsers just for this step. And then right now, the latest version of WLED, at the time of recording at least, is 0.14.0. So that's what we're going to be installing. All we need to do is hit this install button. And the browser will pop up this little window here that shows serial devices that are connected to our computer. You'll probably see some Bluetooth things as well, depending on what you've got connected to your machine. This last one for us is the one we're going to need. It's this USB serial device here. And so you just choose this and hit connect. And so your browser should now connect to your device, and you'll see this little prompt or button here that you can click to install WLED. So that's what we're going to do. Now, before we proceed, on my particular device here, there's a write protect feature, and yours might have it as well. You might have to read the instructions or manual that came with your board. But for me, this boot switch right here, which is very small and kind of hard to press, but I'm going to have to press it here with my thumbnail. You need to be holding that down to be able to write to the device. And so I'm going to hold this down, and while I hold it down, I'm going to press this install button to start the process on the computer. So now it's going to show that that's installing, and now it's erasing, and as soon as I get to this point here where it's actually doing the install, I can go ahead and let go of that boot button. So I'm going to let this sit here, and the install takes a couple minutes, so I'll fast forward the video here, and then we'll catch up with the process once the install is ready to go. Okay, so the installation is done. We can click next here, and it's going to prompt us to connect to our Wi-Fi network, which is great because as soon as we disconnect this thing from the USB, we will have no way to connect to it otherwise. And so you'll need to select your network here and type in your network password, and then it will go ahead and try to connect that device up to your Wi-Fi network. And as soon as it does that, we'll go ahead and hit this visit device button to make sure that it worked. So this will open a new tab in our browser, and it's connected to the IP address that my network assigned to this device. Now we don't have any LEDs actually connected to it yet, so we can't do anything fun with this color wheel or these effects or anything like that. But one thing I want to do before we unplug it is go over to the config menu here, and under Wi-Fi setup, it's already got our Wi-Fi connection information here, but we want to give it an easier name to remember. So this this WLED with some random number that it generated, I'm just going to change that to WLED.local. So I'm going to save that. And so now in the future, when we plug this in, we can just connect to it locally on our network with WLED.local. Now at that point, it'll reload this menu or this interface, and there's not really much more we can do to play with it at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and just unplug the device from the USB cable, and it is now ready to go, except that we need to solder some wires onto the appropriate pins here. And while we're at it, we'll solder some wires onto our LED strip as well. So that'll be the next step. It's time to do some soldering. I should probably preface this by saying I'm not super good at soldering, so the good news for you is that if I can do this, you probably can as well. I'm going to start out with just, I've cut a couple of short-ish pieces of these different colors of wire, and I've stripped back the start of that wire, and all we're going to do first of all is just tin it. So all that is we're going to heat it up just a little, and we're going to melt some of this solder down into the strands of wire just to give it kind of a nice little coating there. We don't want to put too much solder on it, but we want to give a nice little bead because we're going to use that actually to attach onto the pin on our ESP32 board. I may want to cut this back just a little bit, so like the length of these pins is like so. Yeah, I think I do. I'm going to trim off just a little bit of the end of this, about that much there. I'm going to try to do my best to keep all of this work in frame. It's a little bit tedious here with the camera angle and trying to make sure that I get you guys a good view. And so now on our board here, we're going to solder directly onto pins. There are other ways you could make these connections with plugs or a breadboard or those kinds of things. I'm trying to minimize the amount of space this thing takes up so that it will fit in the enclosure that I designed. So we're going to actually just solder this directly onto the pin. And you can figure out which pin it is because they're all labeled. So this one here says VIN for voltage in. The one next to it is ground. So those will be our red and white wires. And then we need to just pick any of the data pins. So I'll probably pick one on this opposite row down here, probably D2 or D4, to be our green wire for carrying data. And it doesn't really matter which one of those we pick. We'll configure that in the software later on. We just have to remember which one it is. So anyway, our red wire goes to this first pin up here on the top row. So I'm going to see if I can get an angle here that works for me and also will work for you. And what we're going to do is start out by just putting a bead of solder onto the end of this pin. Yeah, this angle is not great, but we'll do what we can. Whatever's necessary to get a decent shot for you guys. All right, there we go. So we've got a little bit of solder there, and all we're going to do is now touch these together and do my best to just kind of melt this wire right onto that pin. Just like so, right? And the important thing is just that it doesn't touch any of its neighboring pins, right? Now, lucky for me, the collection of wires here came with a little bit of heat shrink tubing. That piece is a bit long, so I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter. But yeah, we've got matching heat shrink tubing in every color. So we'll just use those here to feed this on and cover up our messy solder joint. It's actually not that messy. Turned out okay. All right, and that's looking good. So now we have our first wire connected. I need to do the same thing with the white wire on this neighboring pin, and then, like I said, one of the green wires on one of these data pins over here on this side. So I won't do that on camera. It's the same process, but hopefully you get the idea there. Just put a little solder on the wire, put a little solder on the pin, and then connect them together. And yeah, I'll finish this one up, then we'll jump over to the LED strip and do the soldering there next. So that first bit of soldering I think was probably a good warm-up, because this is going to be even kind of smaller and more tedious. What I've done this time is I've just taped this LED strip down to the work mat just so it doesn't move around, rather than using the little clips that I have on my soldering iron. And I guess it's important to note that there's a little arrow here that shows the direction of data flow, so you want to make sure you're connecting to the starting end of the strip, so the arrow is pointing away from where we're connecting. And what we're going to do, these little pads are labeled ground and data and plus 5 volts. So it's going to be white, then green, then red, the wires that we need to attach onto here. And the way we're going to do that is, first of all, cleaning off my soldering iron. All right, so we're going to just heat this up a tiny bit and get a dot of solder, hopefully you can see that, on each of these pads. And it's really important that we don't, obviously connect them to each other. So we just want to put the very smallest perfect dot just like that as a starting point. Now I've got my wires here and I've already cut them back and tinned them as well. So the only difference here is that I left a very small area exposed outside of the shielding on the outside of the wire, because I just want to see enough of the wire to connect it here and then not have any extra. So all we're again going to do is just touch this dot of solder, connect it just in like that. So that's nice and solid. That was our ground wire, which is white. So the next one over is our green data wire. So again, we're just going to touch this, melt that little dot of solder, and connect the wire right to it. That looks solid. And one more. This turned out to be not so bad. Doing the first round of soldering gave me enough practice to remind myself how to do this job. As I say that, this one's being a little bit more tricky, but there we go. All right, so now we have our 3 wires attached to our strip of LEDs, and we've got the same colored 3 wires attached onto our control board. So let's get this all connected together and see if the LEDs work. Okay folks, moment of truth. Here we go. We'll see if we've done everything correctly so far. The only other thing I've done here off camera is I cut a short white and red wire and attached them here into the positive for red and negative for white terminals here of our power connector. And so all that should be left is for us to connect like colored wires together. So we've got 3 red ones. We're going to use these Wago clips to connect these things together. So we'll bring a red from the LEDs, a red from our control board, and a red from our power connector into that one. Then we'll do the same thing here with the white wires. I've turned off the overhead lighting a little bit, or I've turned it down at least, in preparation for the moment that should happen shortly here, where we power this thing on and those LEDs light up so you can see them good on video. And then we've got our data connectors here, and there's only 2 data wires, right? Because the power connector obviously doesn't have data. So we connect our 2 greens together here with our 2 segment Wago connector. All right, so everything here is connected up. We'll clean all that up when we put it in the enclosure later on, but for now, we should be able to grab the power connector, which is already plugged into the wall, and plug this in here. And look at that. So we've got some LEDs on, and obviously this is getting power as well. Now WLED by default only shows the first 30 LEDs. So what we need to do is go to our WLED.local from our web browser, and that should bring up the user interface for the software again. And before we play around with this, let's go into config and LED preferences, and we should be able to scroll down here and find the length of the LED strip. So I happen to know that my strip is 128 LEDs long. That's the length I'm going to need for getting around that piece of acrylic. So if I hit save here, now the rest of our strip is lit up, right? So it's all this kind of orange color. We'll go back. We can use our color wheel here to make it, purple or green or whatever we'd like. You can also, use some of these animation styles. So there's breathe, it's kind of breathing in and out and so on. There's also these color schemes that are set up here. So we'll go for something kind of bright. And, you know, maybe this one's pretty crazy, I've noticed before. Yeah. So anyway, you can play around with this sort of thing and see all of your, or figure out what all of your favorite animations and stuff are. So anyway, good test. This shows that everything's working, and I'm going to change it back to solid here for a second because that was kind of crazy. All right, so at this point, what's next is to disconnect this and go and grab the enclosure and get all of these things fit into our enclosure. Okay, time to get all this stuff in the enclosure and ready for final assembly. I'm excited. This is turning out really good so far, and I'm excited with how it's going. So this enclosure wasn't that difficult to design. I tried, the main goal was to keep it as small as possible, so everything's going to be quite a tight fit in here. And I think I mentioned earlier on in the process, but the plan was always to take the pins on this ESP32 board and bend them over. So I've done that now off camera, and so that way the whole thing is a little bit shorter and it should fit height-wise into this enclosure. So this presses in place right here. I've just got to get the wires out of the way of the connectors or the little pegs right here, the posts. So this presses down just like that. That looks good. And then this little channel here is going to be to run these wires along. So I'll have to get some tweezers and push those down into place. I'm not going to actually do the final assembly here because I might need to trim some of the wires a little bit shorter. So I'll plan to do that off camera, but I'll just show you guys how this works out. So these Wago connectors will clip into place just like this. Let's see. Happy accident. I happen to have cut these wires at lengths so that they'll kind of reach to there and there and there. So that was lucky. So if that's the case, we'll run the red ones here. So we'll need another 3-segment connector here. Push that into place. And then our 2-segment data wire connector will be down here. So we'll push that into place. Nice. Those fit well. And those will be possible with tweezers to flip up and connect the wires in even once they're in place like this. And then finally, the last piece of this is our power plug, which will fit up here into this opening and then just kind of press down into place. Perfect. So again, those wires should be shortened so that they go right to here and there's not extra slack, because really this little corner up here is the only place I have for extra wire. So yeah. Then the final piece of this will be, we need to take our LED wires and run them up through here. So this is the top corner piece that's going to go onto the outside of our sheet of acrylic. And so the way this is going to work is we're going to, I'll attach this strip of LEDs, if the wires will get out of the way so I can show you. I'll attach this starting all the way up here in the corner, but then the wires need to run up through this hole so that they line up with this kind of excess space for extra wires here when they come up into here. But again, they're going to need to be a lot shorter. So the plan is I will wire them in like this and then just flip this over and connect it up so that it's all enclosed. So yeah, like I said, cutting these to the right lengths and stripping them back and getting them connected in here is going to be a bit of a tedious process. It's going to take me some time to get it super cleaned up and ready to go. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then we'll be back and we'll put this strip of LEDs around the acrylic and light it up and see what happens. Okay, the electronics enclosure is done. You see it right here. I went ahead and put this top corner piece onto the acrylic as well, because that just helped me to be able to route the wires and then press this piece down on top. So this is just press fit again, so it can come apart in the future if I need to replace anything here. I suppose we should plug in power real quick up to the top here and make sure that our LEDs are still working. Yeah, so the whole string is working, so that's good. And so now all that should be left is for me to fit the rest of the pieces around the outside of this and feed the LED strip through them. I'm going to do my best to try to keep this in shot. This is a very large piece of acrylic, and so I've gotten you the widest shot that I can do with my setup here. Hopefully that's good enough. One thing I've done before we started here is I actually test fit all of these 3D printed parts around the outside of this thing, because even though I had precisely measured them and printed them to certain measurements so that they theoretically should fit around this, obviously this is a custom cut piece of acrylic, so it doesn't come out at exactly the dimensions that they said it would. So you'll see here, maybe the camera shows it, I've marked left, right, bottom, and top on these straight pieces. I actually had to use my plastic saw and cut off just a little bit of each end to get them to be the perfect length to fit in between the corners. And then likewise, I've got like a top left corner and a bottom right corner and so on. So this will be the corner that we use down here on this corner that I'm headed towards right now. So what I'm gonna do is, I think the plan, and I haven't tried this yet, so we'll see how it works here. I think the plan is gonna be to peel off the adhesive backing here and to grab our right-hand side piece here and try my best to, like if I just line this up with the side here, I'm not sure if the depth of the LEDs is gonna be enough to just press this into place and have it actually stick down onto the thing here. So let's see if we can make this work. Get the orientation of it right so it's not twisting. And then lift this up just a little bit here and slide this on. Right, so if I push hard here along this edge, what I'm not sure is if that's enough force to attach the adhesive to the LED strip, and I think the answer is not quite. Yeah, so what I'm going to need to do then is grab something, and I'm going to use these tweezers here and just very carefully reach down here and try to press that up against there so that we get a good adhesion. Because what I'm hoping is that the adhesive backing on the back of this helps to hold these pieces in place. Again, they're made to press fit on here, and so they're nice and tight, but I also don't want them to separate from one another. So I'm hoping that the adhesion here keeps that nice and flush up against this edge here, if that makes sense. So we'll do that. Here, I'll turn this around so we can see the corner. So with any luck, yeah, the corner works out to be in between LEDs. I tried to arrange it so that that would be the case. Here's our bottom right corner. So I'm again gonna just pull this back and make sure it's not twisted. Fit this corner piece onto here, like so. And then make sure with my tweezers here that it's pressed up against this edge and the adhesion is good. Yeah, so there's that corner, and then we'll continue on with the rest, you know, the next side and the corner and so on. Again, I'm probably not going to show this whole process on camera, mostly because it's difficult to do here on this desk. I'm going to move to a larger table surface so that I have more space to just lay this thing out and finish putting these parts on there. But yeah, that should be it. When I get to the end, by the way, up here, the plan is, so this top corner here does not have any LED in this segment of it yet, right? The LED starts right at that corner and goes this way. So the plan when I get up to here is going to be, I'll have the straight segment done and I'll have this much of the LED strip left, assuming that I've measured it correctly. I'm just going to do my best to slide it down underneath there. Like I'll pull this up just a little bit away from the edge like that, slide it down underneath there and then press it down, and hopefully the adhesive will do its job and hold the LED strip into place against that to sort of finish up the edge. So yeah, that's the plan. I'll go ahead and finish that and then we'll be back and I'll show you this thing working, hopefully. Okay, so now with this whole thing assembled, I've got it set here on my desk, tried to get a wide enough camera angle so that you can see the whole thing. And I've turned down the studio lighting a bit so that hopefully the camera will pick up the changes that we make with this thing. I've got it turned on right at the moment and just on kind of a neutral white light. And we're gonna load up the WLED.local web interface on my copy of Chrome here. And so we can do some simple things with it, right? Like we can change its color. and we can change the patterns and all of that sort of stuff. We've already kind of played a bit with those when we were testing out the lights earlier. But what I wanted to show you is you can do some other things too, right? So since we made a rectangular shape here, what I've done is I've gone over here to the segments, and you can add and change segments. So I've created the right segment, which actually starts at LED 0 and goes up to 28. Actually, let's do this. Let's with just the right segment selected, we can turn it red. So you'll see over here along this edge, we're red all the way down to this corner. So I counted and played with the number of LEDs in each segment so that I've got the right segment, which is just this side, then the bottom, which goes across the left and the top. And then on some of these, you can also tell it to either mirror or reverse the direction of like effects that it runs on this thing. And so for example, if I select them all and I tell them to run this Android effect, you'll see that because of the way I've chosen to mirror and reverse the effects, the lights actually start across the top here and kind of look like they're moving down and then back to the middle. So that's all just based on playing with some of these checkboxes here once I've got my segments set up. Now, whenever you get a set of colors and an effect and your segments and everything like you want them, you can go over here to the presets and you can add a preset and give that thing a name. I'm going to hit cancel because I've already saved the things I like, but you give that a name and you can give it a label for quick load and some other things like that. And that actually saves it onto the board, the controller board in here. So even if we lose power and bring it back, we'll be able to pull these presets back up again. So I've created a few presets that we're going to use for some photography and stream testing in just a minute here. I've got this one, which just is actually quite similar to the one we were just looking at, that just has this wave that goes around the outside edge. I've got just a basic red glow. I've got a lighting effect that we're going to use with our Legion of Thor kit in a minute here with a photography session or a videography session. We'll see how this looks, but the idea was to make it look like there was lightning coming in. So yeah, all of these are presets that you can load in and then just switch to, and then you can still use these controls over here to switch it manually. Oh, now see there, I just changed the left and top only to red, and the rest of it stayed on the preset we were on because I didn't have these selected as well, right? So now we can turn the whole thing red like that. So that's a quick tour of how this WLED software works. There's also an app. If you search on your iOS or Android device on your favorite app store, you should be able to find a WLED app. And if you load that on your phone, you get a lot of this same functionality as well on your phone, and you can connect to the LED from that and make changes and save presets and all of that as well. All right, so I wanted to try this thing out in some real-world situations. So I've set up this kind of basic photo shoot here, and I'll give you a wide view here of what it looks like, and then we'll look at some closer up shots of the photo and video that I'm able to capture from it. The idea here is just to leave this thing as a backdrop behind a kit on a turntable. This is the Legion of Thor kit that I just recently finished building on stream. And it's just a straight snap build, but it looks really, really good in front of this backdrop. We've got a couple of different color changes we can play with, and just watching the kit sitting here in front of the backdrop, I think it looks pretty good. And so for our final look at one of the things that I can do with this acrylic sheet, I've jumped over here into my streaming setup. And so here I've got the main camera overhead looking straight down on my desk, and I've got the acrylic sheet sitting here on my desk. Now right now it's turned on, it's just on a kind of a neutral white kind of a light. Let me turn this off for you though, and you can see the difference that it makes. So previously this would be sort of my setup, and you'll see my hands and even the kit that I'm holding here, they all cast a lot of shadows down onto the build surface. So one thing I wanted to try to do was to remove those shadows, and I think lighting it up from behind just a touch like this actually does that quite well. So that's good, and this is kind of a setup I'll be using a lot, just not with this lit in any sort of color. If I do turn it to a color, let's just try that, see. So that kind of works, but I think it's a bit distracting. So most of the time, like I said, I'll just have it on this neutral white color. I've tried to balance the color temperature with the rest of my lighting. So I think that should look nice. Now, a lot of the time, I will actually have this cutting mat or one like it here on the desk. And we'll be building on top of that so that I'm not scratching up or messing up the surface of the acrylic. especially if I'm doing anything with, you know, nippers or knives or things like that. So a lot of the time this will be like this. And if that's the case, I could actually turn on a color. So let me turn on maybe just one of those settings we were using for our photo backdrop. And then it just lights up around the edges of my build mat, which is kind of interesting and yeah, doesn't look that bad either, right? But again, most of the time I'll probably just leave it on this regularly lit kind of a look. And then the other thing I can do, and I've kind of played around with this a bit just to give you an idea of something that I could do, when different alerts happen on stream, so subscribers, followers, things like that, I could potentially do animations and stuff with the build mat to just kind of bring a little bit more excitement, interest to the stream. So for example, here's a quick thing that I threw together that might happen like if the channel gets raided, right? So we have a raid come in and this happens, right? Just for a few seconds, and then the lighting all comes back on and goes back to normal. So yeah, that I might actually leave that hooked up, and my live streams get rated so infrequently. I think it's only ever happened twice, right? I'm gonna leave this turned on, and someday when I get a raid, it's gonna totally freak me out. I'm gonna literally jump out of my chair when that happens. I'll probably tweak it a little bit to get the timings and sound effect and whatever set up just right. So anyway, yeah, this is the what the stream is going to look like, and I'm pretty happy with, you know, especially just without the mat here, just how this looks, and it helps the kit to stand out, and it, again, helps me not to cast quite so many shadows down onto the build surface. So yeah, happy with how that turned out. Okay, so here we are. We made it to the end. This is the final product. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I enjoyed all of the little playing with using it for photography, using it for streaming. I'll definitely be using it for both of those things. So stay tuned to the channel. You'll probably see a lot of shorts coming up pretty soon as I pull out all of my previous builds out of the display cabinet, put them on the turntable in front of this thing, and do some 360 spin videos that I'll probably post as YouTube shorts. So yeah, it'll definitely make some appearances there. Definitely make some appearances on my live streams as well. So check those out on YouTube or Twitch if you haven't seen them yet. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something about LED, and it's actually pretty simple to set something like this up. So yeah, maybe find a cool project that you've got in your head and build something as well with some LEDs in it. And all that's left for me to say is thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.